I'm going to share with you my 3 top favorite ways of buying a business without you spending a penny of your own money. The first way to buy a business without using your own cash is called a leveraged buyout. Now, a leveraged buyout is a very well-known strategy. It's been around for a long time. It's nothing new, but you can use it to buy a small and medium-sized business. Now, it works when there are assets within the business that we can finance, and that finance gives us the cash to buy the business. Yes, you heard right. The business finances its own acquisition. Now, what do I mean when I say assets? Now, typically people think tables and chairs and secondhand computers. Well, those assets don't really have any value whatsoever. We're talking about fixed assets. And also, we're not talking about intangible assets like IP. We're talking about real physical things that a lender can use as collateral for a loan, like buildings, like plant and machinery. So we're talking about real physical assets that have a value. Now, the asset lender will look at those assets, come up with a valuation, and then lend you a percentage of that valuation. And that cash, that percentage that they lend you, is what we're going to be using to finance the acquisition, or at very least the first part of the payment for the business. Now, you might be thinking, and many people in my business buying courses do think, well, how on earth can you get finance against assets that you don't yet own? And it's a good question, but it's not something to be concerned about. It's a little bit like me getting a mortgage against your property even though I don't yet own it. The mortgage offer is there and it all falls into place at the moment the property legally becomes mine. It's exactly the same with financing the assets in the business. It's all about the mechanics. It's all about the simultaneous placing of the finance on the assets once you own the company, and then that releases the cash to go to the seller. Now, if that sounds complicated, don't worry about it. That is what your solicitor is for. It's not something you have to worry about how it works and in what order. Your solicitor does it for you. So if you can find a business that has sufficient assets, we can finance those assets to make the acquisition. But you may be wondering, what happens if there's already finance on those assets? Well, again, if we use the property analogy, it's a little bit like paying off the old mortgage and the new mortgage falls into place. We'd pay off the old finance with the new finance. We might, on some occasions, even go to the existing lender and get those assets revalued. Maybe we can increase the percentage that that lender has extended onto those assets, and as a result, that frees up cash. But remember, this only works with businesses with hard, fixed assets. But when you can find a business like that, this should be your number 1 go-to method for buying that business without using your own cash. The second way to buy a business without utilizing any of your own cash is to use someone else's, specifically using the cash that's in the business that you are buying. Now, this is a kind of mind-blowing concept that a lot of new deal makers take quite a while to get their heads around, and I can absolutely understand that. How do we use a company's own money to fund the acquisition? Well, there's a couple of ways. So the first way is when a business has taken prepayments for goods and services that have yet to be provided. Maybe they are deposits, maybe they are payments on account, or maybe just customers have paid in advance, but the products or services haven't yet been delivered. Now, when you buy that business, it's now your responsibility to deliver those products or services, which means that money is yours. So when you buy the business, on completion, that money is transferred to you because you as the new owners are going to supply the goods and services that money has paid for. Now we can use that money for the initial consideration payment to the seller of the business. Now there is a downside to this. The downside to this is that cash flow might be a little bit tight over the next few weeks or few months. So this only really works with businesses that have very, very strong positive cash flows, but you still have to tighten your belt. Now a second situation is where the owner of the business has built up cash in the company, which is profits. They represent profits, but the owner hasn't withdrawn the money, because when they do, it crystallizes a taxable event, which means that they've now got to pay tax on that money. Now, if they don't need it, usually what people think is, well, just leave it in the company, because if I take it out, I'm going to pay tax. No one enjoys doing that. So we've got this cash balance in the business. So how can we use that? Well, we can explain to the seller of the business that they get certain tax reliefs for the sale of shares. In the UK at the moment, it's just 10% tax on the first £1 million received on the disposal of shares. Now you've got to tick certain boxes. The shares have to have been owned for a certain amount of time, for example. Let's just assume that that's all okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to show the seller of the business how we can use their money in the business to make that initial consideration payment and give it to them rather than them take it out, which means that they only have to pay 10% tax on it, which could save them hundreds of thousands of pounds. So you are effectively gifting them hundreds of thousands of pounds by knowing more about buying a business than they know about selling a business. Always very important that it's that way round, of course. And as a result, they are better off, but you can use that surplus cash, that retained profit, for that initial consideration payment, which means that you don't have to reach into your own pocket. So a very, very smart way of buying a business without using your own cash. Let me share with you now the third way of buying a business without using your own cash, and it's one of my favorite methods. It's when you've got a business that owns a property. So it might be a hotel business, it might be a care home business, it can be a dental practice, a veterinary practice, but the business owns a property and the owner of the business wants to sell the property as well. See, some owners want to retain the property and lease it to you and have that rental income for the next 15, 20, 25 years for the term of the commercial lease. And sometimes they want to sell lock, stock and barrel, and they want to sell the property as well. Now, you might be interested in owning the property, but you might not. And buying properties can be capital intensive, that can burn through cash. So why don't you team up with a property investor, someone who wants to own the property but doesn't want to own the business? So they buy the property and you buy the business. Now, in its simplest terms, if we are going to be paying for this business with something on completion and something over a period of years, 3, 4, 5 years into the future, then the money raised from the sale of the property goes to the seller on day one. So they're happy, they've got their money for their world cruise or whatever it is that they want to do. And then you buy the business over a period of time. In other words, the seller gets what they want, the property investor gets what they want, and you get what you want, which is a business without putting in your own cash. Now, I have given this in its simplest terms because there are layers of complexity. If the company owns the business and the property, then you've got to somehow get that property out of the company without that being a taxable event. And some accountants will tell you it's just not possible. They'll say that stamp duty has to be paid and there has to be some sort of value to the uplift in the value of the property and there has to be tax paid on that. And they're all wrong, because what you need is a specialist accountant who knows how to demerge the property out of the company. And it does require a specialist. And this is why your deal team is just so important. Buying a business is not a DIY job. You can't do it all yourself. You need other people to help you. But if you've got that specialist advice and support, the property strategy is a very neat way of buying a business without putting in your own cash. So there you have 3 ways to buy a business without using your own cash, but there are plenty more to learn. You see, the more methods you know of buying businesses, the better a deal maker you will become. So come on my next Zoom fast track training. There is a link somewhere on this page, and I will see you on the next course. But in the meantime, like the video, subscribe to the channel, tap the notifications bell, and I will send you a notification when I release my next video on buying a business.